Darkcast Network, the best in indie podcasts. I'm Griffin, and you're listening to Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBTQ+.
Sup, creeps, and welcome to Creepy Confidential. Is Mothman really a supernatural force predicting impending doom? Did Apollo 11 really land on the moon in 1969? Did you find out if that was a cult that was living just 2 doors down that you waved to every single day when you got your mail? If these are the things you ponder when you should be sleeping, then I would like to welcome you to Creepy Confidential. I'm your host, Noelle, your resident weirdo Wisconsinite. I open case files on my favorite cryptids, cults, conspiracies, and other worldly creepy, with new cases, live broadcasts, and local lore. Some stories have been lost with time. Others are perhaps still happening today in your local communities, right up under your very creepy noses. So get ready, creeps. It's Creepy Confidential.
Hey, this is a true crime show with adult content. No, I'm not recording while naked. I just mean that I sometimes drop swear words. Hey there, Rainbow Warriors, and welcome to Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBTQ+. I'm your host, CJ. There will not be a new episode next week, as I'll be on the road to the True Crime Paranormal Festival in Denver. And it's actually an 8-day road trip, so I'm not 100% sure if there'll be an episode the week after or not. We'll just have to see how the trip goes. So far, the trip has been kinda rocky for me. And I haven't even left. But that's because the breeder who said she'd deliver me a Maltese puppy in Denver, she went and promised out all her puppies to other people. And she did not save one for me. She didn't take deposits. And I made the mistake of thinking our texting back and forth would solidify her bringing me a puppy. So that's gonna be a bummer for me. You know, I have this huge hole in my heart that Nilla held, and I just can't seem to get it filled even a little bit. I did rent a van out for our road trip to haul me, my daughter, her boyfriend, and their 2 big dogs along. Oh, yippee, that should be an interesting trip. But at least with the van, I don't have to strap my totes of merch on top of the vehicle just to lose it all over the highway somewhere. Our missing but not forgotten LGBTQ person this episode is 41-year-old Taylor Casey from Chicago, Illinois. Taylor went missing from a yoga retreat in the Bahamas. To be more specific, Paradise Island in Nassau on June 19, 2024. Exactly a week later, on Wednesday, June 26th, her phone was found in the ocean, but all of her other belongings were still at the retreat. The organizers of the retreat have asked the Bahama police to investigate into Taylor's disappearance. These same people learned of her being missing when Taylor failed to show up for her classes on June 20th. She was last seen late the night of June 19th. Bahama police seem to be keeping whatever information they have close, and they're sharing very little of it. This generally means we don't know if it's because they don't have anything to share, or if they believe foul play is involved. They're not even saying if Taylor's phone in the ocean was found close to the retreat or not, although they are saying they've conducted an intensive investigation into Taylor's disappearance. I hate feeling doubtful that the Bahama police are competent, but I remember on the case of Rebecca Corium on the Disney ship, law enforcement from the Bahamas was lackluster at best. Oddly, just after Taylor disappeared, the U.S. issued a Level 2 travel advisory to the island due to crime. To which I say, damn, it'd be nice to know these things before a person actually travels to the place, right? Taylor's family and friends are extremely worried about her. If you or anyone you might know was on this retreat, lives in the Bahamas, or may have information on finding Taylor, please contact the Bahama Police. Taylor is a light-skinned black woman standing 5'10" and weighing 145 pounds. And Taylor, we hope you're found safe, my friend. I'd like to preface this case by telling you it's an oldie. It's a double murder that occurred in 1967 and remained a cold case until the killer confessed on their deathbed in 2009. She was a simple girl at the age of 18, tomboyish really. Short hair, no makeup, sort of slouched when she walked. Her confidence in herself seemed to be lacking. She was a hard worker, though. She had 2 jobs. One was at a hospital as a nurse's assistant, and the other, she worked part-time at High's ice cream store in Staunton, Virginia. Her name was Sharon Diane Crawford, but she went by her middle name of Diane. At High's ice cream store, she worked with 2 girls. 2 girls she had actually went to high school with but were a little bit older than her. One was 19-year-old Connie Smoots Heavener, who was a twin having a twin brother. The other girl was 20-year-old Carolyn Heavener Perry, whose parents owned that particular ice cream shop. Still in her teens, Connie was already married. But then again, it was 1967, marriage and babies as teenagers. It was pretty common stuff. Connie had married the brother of her best friend and co-worker, Carolyn. The 2 girls had been cheerleaders together in high school. And since Carolyn's parents owned the shop, she too worked there. Carolyn also was married, and she had a 2-year-old daughter. It was uncharacteristically hot April 11th of 1967. Loads of people had visited the ice cream shop for their favorite treats. Diane had called out sick that day, and one of the other 2 girls was filling in for her. But Diane had problems with her 2 co-workers of Connie and Carolyn. Mostly with Connie. Connie had taken to teasing and name-calling Diane for her appearance. Lesbian, dyke, and other names were meant to be derogatory. They were her go-to insults. Diane very well could have been a lesbian, but she had no experience in dating girls. She didn't have any experience in dating boys. So Connie's jabs were solely based on Diane's looks. And that stung Diane to her core. Prior to the evening of April 11th, Diane had called up an acquaintance, someone she worked at the hospital with, actually, and she asked this girl, Joyce Bradshaw, if she wanted to go grab a burger with her. Joyce said sure. Diane picked Joyce up, and once they got to the burger joint, Diane had Joyce open her glove compartment. And no, that's not a sexual innuendo. When Joyce opened the glove box, a .25 caliber pistol was revealed. Diane called the gun her baby, and she said there's 2 bullets in it. One is for my stepdad, who had allegedly molested Diane, and one is for the girl I work with. We now know that Diane was referring to Connie. Well, Joyce had no clue who the girl she worked with was, nor did she ask who it might be, or why Diane wanted to use the bullets on the 2 people she named, because actually, right now, she was kind of terrified of this rogue girl that she was with. And to be honest, Joyce couldn't get home and away from Diane fast enough. Back to April 11th, 1967 at the ice cream shop. It was 11 p.m., closing time. Highs had extended their hours until 11 due to the warmer weather that was occurring. Connie and Carolyn were starting their closing the store procedures. In the back door of the shop, a figure had opened the door, and they had popped in. It was Diane. She had come to tell Connie she wouldn't be able to cover Connie's shift the following day. For some reason, this started a verbal altercation between the 2 girls. In a fit of rage, Diane grabbed her baby that she'd been hiding somewhere on her body, perhaps in a pocket or tucked into the waistband of the pants she was wearing. She held the gun, and she shot Connie, who immediately slumped to the ground. Carolyn was startled and she saw what Diane had done. She rushed over to Connie and she knelt over her protectively. That's when Diane took the gun to Carolyn and shot her too. As the girls lay one on top of another on the ground in a pool of their own blood, Diane grabbed the money the girls had collected from the register and were going to drop into a security box. The total amount was $138. I know that doesn't sound like a bunch of money now, but in 1967 money, it was a good lot of pocket change. Diane fled out the back door to her car, and she drove around aimlessly wondering what she was going to do. She was hoping no one had seen her go into the shop or leave, but she was nervous. After hours of driving around in a daze, the answers suddenly came to her, and she drove to a farm that she had been to dozens of times. The farm was owned by Dave Bocock, who just so happened to be the detective in charge of criminal investigations for the Staunton Police Department. Dave was Diane's friend, and he was the one who taught her how to use her gun, which is why she had spent so much time at his farm. When she got to the farm, Dave, who was actually the first law enforcement at the crime scene, was home now, and Diane told Dave exactly what had happened. He told her not to worry, and he made Diane give him her gun. He then put it in a metal box and buried it somewhere on his property. The girls in the ice cream shop were discovered by a passerby who had used a payphone. This man called in saying he believed that there were injured people in the High's ice cream store. He stated his name is Bill Thomas. Bill was a 24-year-old school teacher. Again, Detective Dave was the first law enforcement at the scene, and Detective Dave didn't yet know what had happened. But then more police and the ambulance arrived. Connie had already succumbed to her injury, but Carolyn was hanging on by a thin thread. She ended up passing away on the way to the hospital. To start their investigation that appeared to be a robbery gone wrong with money missing, police called upon Bill Thomas, the one who phoned the crime in. He was kind of a witness, and it seemed like a good place for them to start, especially since DNA testing wasn't really a thing back then. They most likely dusted for fingerprints as well, but with so many people in and out of the ice cream shop, it kind of seemed like a daunting task. Once investigators had Bill down at the station, he told them he saw two men run off. One of the men was black and the other was white. The black man was big. He was 6 feet tall, and the white man, he was even bigger. It soon came out that Bill was lying about seeing the two men. No one really knows why he decided to lie about a story, but you can bet it put him to the head of the murder suspect list. For someone to make up a story and try to involve themselves even more into a case, it's a little suspect for sure. And that's what the police thought as well. Well, almost all of them. With the exception of Detective Dave Bocock, of course. But Dave was ready to let Bill take the fall for the crime with no guilt on his conscience whatsoever. Since Detective Dave was the lead on the case, very minimal was done. He didn't even interview the victim's family for leads, because Dave didn't need to. He knew what had happened. It wasn't too long after the murders that Joyce Bradshaw, remember her? She's the nursing co-worker of Diane's who went out for burgers with her. Joyce went to see Detective Dave to tell him about seeing a gun in Diane's car and relaying the chilling statement that Diane had made about her gun having 2 bullets and who they were for. What Dave told Joyce was that he knew about Diane's gun. In fact, he's the one who taught her how to use it, and Diane's a crack shot. Joyce somehow felt very intimidated and frightened by Dave's words, and this fear made her decide to just drop it and not pursue her knowledge of Diane's gun and the ominous threats any further. A couple of days later, Detective Dave got a hold of Joyce. He told her that he gave Diane a polygraph test in which she passed, and that the bullets that shot the ice cream shop girls didn't match the bullets in Diane's gun. He told Joyce this to ease her mind and to get her off of his back. You're probably getting the idea now that either Dave is a dirty cop or he for some reason has a strong need to protect Diane, or maybe both. Some sources have said that the answer is both, with Dave being heard telling someone how easy it is as an officer to manipulate the system. There's speculation also that Dave might have been Diane's birth father. Her birth certificate only lists her mother on it, but he might have taken a keen fascination in Diane because perhaps he was her birth dad. More and more suspicion was casted upon Bill Thomas, the alleged witness. He was arrested a year later in 1968, and he was charged with the murder of only Connie. What, CJ? Why only one of the girls? Well, warriors, this was actually a very smart move by the prosecution. And the reason they went after Bill for only one of the murders was just in case he was acquitted. If the prosecution lost the case against Bill for Connie's murder, they could still go after him for Carolyn's murder. Otherwise, if the prosecution went after him for both and lost, they couldn't retry Bill due to double jeopardy laws, which, as you probably know, is when a person who's been accused is acquitted by a jury and they cannot be prosecuted for the same crime twice. Now, Bill was kind of his own worst enemy, and he was doing stupid-ass things like going around town and telling people he killed the two girls. People thought he was crazy. And to be honest, with continually inserting himself into the crime, Bill must have been a little off-kilter. I mean, it's pretty dumb to first lie to the police with a bogus story of two guys fleeing, and then to go on and tell everyone he did the crime. Something must have been going on with him. Maybe he felt he lived a meager existence and needed to feel important somehow. I just don't know. He was 24 years old and a school teacher. That in itself was a wonderful accomplishment. I don't know why he kept trying to sabotage himself. So, Bill goes to trial, and the evidence against him is not enough for the jury to substantiate that he go to prison. There wasn't even a murder weapon found. His fingerprints were nowhere in the ice cream shop. How could they possibly find him guilty, in spite of the hearsay about him bragging to people he murdered these girls, in spite of him initially lying to the police with the fabricated story of who did it? There was nothing to prove his involvement. Back in those days, innocent until proven guilty seemed to hold more weight than it does today. It took the jury 3 hours to come back with Bill's acquittal. Now the prosecutors, disappointed that they didn't get their man, had to wait to see if more evidence would crop up, so that way they could go after Bill for Carolyn's murder. In the meantime, Diane moved away from Staunton, Virginia. She decided to not live her truth because the burden was way too much at that time. So she married a man, and they had 2 children together. The man she married, his last name was Smith. She chose to ditch going by her middle name and to go by Sharon instead. She was now Sharon Smith instead of Diane Crawford. In 2006, Detective Dave Bocock passed away. He took Diane's secret to the grave with him. Other detectives who had taken over would look at this case with perplexity, wondering who could have killed these girls. Not one of them could figure it out or even come up with another viable suspect other than Bill Thomas. For years, the families of the victims continued to hound the police, asking them why they could not find out who murdered their daughters, even with advancements in DNA technology and ballistic evidence. Police had no answers for them as to why. One detective commented that a typical murder case would normally have a 3-inch thick folder on it, where the file on Connie and Carolyn, it was only half an inch thick. There just wasn't much to go on. In 2008, the case had some life pumped back into it. That's when Joyce Bradshaw, who had been holding on to what transpired the night she went with Diane for burgers and saw the gun in Diane's glove compartment, and had heard Diane's ominous threats of killing 2 people. This information had to still be laying really heavy on Joyce's mind for her to bring it back up. She made a call to Crime Stoppers. Also in 2008, a cousin of one of the victims, whose name is Lowell Sheets, he had been looking into who murdered his cousin. Joyce got wind of this and she went to him with her information. This information resurrected the memory of the long-forgotten part-time ice cream shop worker who had called in sick the night of the murders. Lowell Sheets is the one who got the police active again on this case. The case was over 40 years old. Sharon Smith, a.k.a. Diane Crawford, was no longer married. And I'm not positive if her husband passed away or if they divorced. But her children were grown by now, and she was ailing. So she moved back to Staunton, their female partner. Sharon was now finally comfortable enough to live her truth without worrying about being teased for it. But her health was so bad she was admitted to a nursing home. She was dying from kidney and heart failure. When detectives went to question Sharon Smith in August of 2008, she did not want to tell him the truth, but she finally relented that she was the one who shot both Connie and Carolyn in the head. After she drove around for a while, she went to Detective Dave's ranch and she gave him the gun, which he buried somewhere on his property. In November of 2008, Sharon was arrested, and a mugshot of her was taken in her bed at the hospital she was in. She remained at that hospital facility until she passed away just a few months later on January 19, 2009. Family members of the victims were still none too pleased with the police, even after Sharon confessed. They felt the police were dragging their feet so Sharon could leave the world peacefully without having any consequence for her actions in 1967. Although it must be said that the families have felt some comfort in finally finding out who really killed their loved ones. Rest in power, Connie and Carolyn. Our true crime quickie was sent to me by my buddy Jamie B. This case is from Utah and it just happened March of this year. So unfortunately, there's no final resolution yet, but one is being worked on, so they're getting close. The story is about a 21-year-old trans man named Alex Franco. Alex had his life quickly taken from him. It was fairly soon after he willingly climbed into a white Jeep Liberty. This was in front of his girlfriend's home in a Taylorsville neighborhood of Salt Lake County, Utah. Also in the white Jeep Liberty were a 15-year-old boy and 2 17-year-old boys. These minors whose names are being withheld because of their age, at least one of these 3 were known by Alex. Alex had arranged for these teens to pick him up so he could buy himself a gun. But it would seem that these teens had other plans for Alex. My assumption in this case is that the gun Alex was set to buy is the same gun that murdered him. The 3 teens knew Alex had money on him, enough to buy a gun. And that's when the whole situation turned on Alex and became a robbery instead. The 15-year-old held the gun on Alex, and one of the 3 teens pepper sprayed Alex's eyes, and then Alex was shot once in his head, which killed him. The car then sped away with Alex's body still in it. The 3 teenagers drove to a remote location in a nearby desert and they dropped Alex's remains there. One of the 17-year-old kids actually turned himself in to the police, and he led authorities to Alex's body that was dumped in the desert. His name is now public record, but it's really not important in the telling of Alex's story. He claims to have been the driver of the white Jeep Liberty. The 3 teens have been arrested, and they're being charged as adults. Their trials have not happened yet, but it does look like the state of Utah is taking the case very seriously, since these teens will be tried as adults. Rest in power, Alex. I love you, Rainbow Warriors. You matter. And I'll catch you in a couple of weeks after the True Crime Paranormal Festival in Denver and my road trip is over. Fingers crossed and good juju's in the universe for me, please, that it's going to be a safe trip and that maybe I'll be able to find myself a little Maltese puppy to bring home with me. Remember, it's not a crime to be gay or to live your truth, unless you're a murderer.